Okay, I think this video needed to be made because honestly, I think someone could get hurt. I've just noticed a lot of risky scenarios in VFR communications at non-towered airports that have just really stuck out to me. So the good news is I think these are really easy to fix, but it does take some attention. So I wanted to call them out here. The first situation is on good weather days when you've got VFR traffic in the pattern, but then you've also got people doing practice instrument approaches in the vicinity of the airport. So basically you got VFR and IFR traffic together. Now, normally on actual IFR weather days, when the weather sucks and VFR traffic aren't really flying, then this problem doesn't persist. But when it's sunny outside and the airspace is crowded, look out. The VFR traffic are doing their thing, talking about the cute little downwind that they're on. And meanwhile, the IFR traffic is just shouting out what fix they are over and what approach they're on and stuff. And honestly, it might as well be in two different languages, because if the VFR traffic doesn't know where that fix is, or even what an instrument approach is, or how far they are from the runway, it's really not helpful. Now, you could argue that the VFR traffic ought to familiarize themselves with the approaches of the airport and know what fixes they are. But I mean, like, in reality, is that really what happens? I mean, if I look back, 17-year-old newly licensed Charlie, honestly, if I'm just being totally honest, I think, I don't remember it vividly, but I think I just looked the other way. I was just like, I don't know, they're around here somewhere, they're announcing themselves, no factor. Huge mistake. I think a more practical solution is for the practice IFR traffic to just briefly add into their transmissions where they are in plain English. So instead of just saying, were you SETI inbound on the RNAV 14 approach, you could say, we're on a 12-mile final on the RNAV 14 approach, landing full stop. It doesn't have to be long, but just something to provide some context for all the VFR people so they can understand you. And this is especially true on like VOR approaches or DME arcs and stuff, because you could be just about any direction from the airport, but still on the approach. So it becomes even more important to announce yourself in plain English where you are relative to the airport and to other traffic. The FAA actually put out an advisory circular, which is basically just like a glorified memo on non-towered airport communications. And I was reading it last night, and they summarized this perfectly. I thought, that's a really good description. So here's what they said. Non-instrument rated pilots might not understand radio calls referring to approach waypoints, depicted headings, or missed approach procedures. IFR pilots often indicate that they're on a particular approach, but that might not be enough information for a non-IFR rated pilot to actually know your location. Bingo. It's better to provide specific direction and distance from the airport, as well as the pilot's intentions upon completion of the approach. So for example, instead of saying procedure turn inbound VOR approach 36, it should be 6 miles south, inbound VOR approach runway 36, low approach only. Or 6 miles south, inbound VOR approach runway 36, landing full stop. It's actually a really helpful resource, so I'll include a link to it down in the description. The second dangerous situation is not announcing yourself in the traffic pattern at all. Now, it can be tempting when you're not hearing anyone else flying around to think, there's nobody here. I'll just, I won't say anything because I'm just talking to the birds. But the problem is when another person starts to come into the pattern and they start listening to the frequency, they don't hear anyone talking, they think the same thing. They're going, hey, no one's home. I just won't bother. I'm just talking to the birds here. So you can see what happens. Both pilots think they're the only ones there, and really bad situations can happen really quickly. So even if I'm all alone, I mean, it's good practice to be talking up. I always try to speak up on the radio, even if I'm like really confident I'm the only person there. Next, I try to remember to squelch the radio momentarily just before I take off to make sure that it's turned up and I can hear it. Now, it's rare, but it can totally happen where you might not think anyone is actually around, but in reality, you just have your volume turned all the way down. And even if you already picked up the AWOS or something, this is still worth doing, because like what can happen is you might have AWOS on COM 2 where you're listening, and then you switch over to COM 1 to go to tower or to the CTAF and stuff. And COM 2 was turned up, but COM 1 was actually turned all the way down. So you think you can hear people, but actually you can't. And that can lead to a bunch of issues. I had this happen about a year ago, not to me, but I noticed it happened to someone else in the pattern where we could hear him, but he clearly couldn't hear us. And he was getting all frustrated when he noticed all of these other planes like coming in the pattern, like not announcing themselves. And he's like, I'm trying to communicate with you. I'm trying to tell you what I'm doing, and you're not listening to everything. We're like, dude, everybody can hear you. We're all talking to each other. You just can't hear us. So I think this was probably the problem, and you can see how it can create some hazards very quickly. Next, sometimes we want to be spiffy on the radio and cut it short to feel cool, but in reality, our transmissions at non-towered airports should follow the same cadence each time and not leave anything out. So including the airport, your type of aircraft and tail number, your current position, and your altitude. Although if you're in the pattern and at pattern altitude, you don't really have to say your altitude, but any other situation, it's helpful to list out. List your intentions, the landing runway and the type of landing, and then repeat the airport. Now, every time someone leaves off one of these things, it's like a huge gap. It's just a gaping hole in the usefulness of the information. I'll hear guys say things like, Gillespie County Airport, Skyline 6 Delta Foxtrot is on the downwind. Okay, well, are you on left downwind or right downwind? That'd be helpful to know. And for what runway, for that matter? That literally wasn't helpful. I still don't know where you are. It was only marginally more helpful than the guy I heard say one time, Gillespie County Airport, I'm over the Walmart inbound. He just can't even make that crap up. So, don't be that guy. Or people will say things like, Gillespie County Airport, Skyline 6 Delta Foxtrot is on final, runway 14, which is slightly more helpful, but what are your intentions when you land? What type of landing is it? Is it full stop? Is it touch and go? Are you just doing a low pass and staying in the pattern? Like, what are you doing? And also, again, repeating the airport at the end, where are you? Because a lot of guys will leave that part off. And the problem is, in busy airspaces, a lot of times there are so many people from various airports all talking on the same frequency. And so it's not uncommon to be stepped on, meaning you get cut off. And so people might only hear like the second half of your transmission. So in this instance, hearing the airport at the end repeated is so important. Now, if you hear people do this, the best thing you can do is just ask for clarification. Honestly, sometimes I forget that we can like talk to each other. And that's part of the point, just to remain safe and ask each other questions. So if you're hearing someone that's on final for landing, but you don't know what they're doing after their landing, just ask them. Say, hey, are you gonna be full stop? Are you staying in the pattern? Because that might impact my pattern entry and kind of our spacing and things. So feel free to speak up. These are lessons that I've learned the hard way. I've also learned a lot of lessons when it comes to talking to air traffic controllers. So tower at airports and approach controllers and things. And in the video on the screen, I'm gonna share with you things that took me years to learn that you're gonna learn in minutes and you can apply today that I promise is gonna help you be more confident talking to ATC. So I'll see you over in that video.